Who is the liar but the one who denies that Jesus is the Christ? This is the Antichrist, the one who denies the Father and the Son.
Many antichrists are going to walk this earth. Of course, Muhammad, the prophet of Islam, was one of these. Not the antichrist, of course, but one of these antichrists that would fit in this category. The passage of the Bible tells us merely that anybody who proclaims that Jesus Christ is not the Messiah, there is no Messiah, such a person is the antichrist, denying the Father and the Son. We are told directly in the Quran of Surah 23 ayah 91, Allah has not taken any son, nor has there ever been with him any deity. We are told in the passage of the Quran that Muhammad's God merely proclaimed the very thing that would make Muhammad an antichrist, if Muhammad were to go around with this exclamation of faith. The Islamic God went as far as to call Christians mushriks, which is people who commit shirk, people who associate partners with God. Many pagans that surrounded Muhammad believed in many deities, and were called mushriks because of their doing so. So in the Islamic paradigm, Christians were associated in the likeness of being pagans. That's funny coming from Muhammad. The reason I say that is because Muhammad was born in Mecca. In Mecca, there was a pilgrimage site. During Muhammad's time when he was born, and during when he was, becoming a prophet, even when he was an older man, there were 360 idols surrounding this pilgrimage site that they called the Kaaba. Now Muhammad, he calls us Christians pagans because we associate others with Allah, just like how pagans associate others with Allah. But the pagans that surrounded Muhammad, they believed in certain type of gods and certain type of idols, right? There was one mention in the Quran of Alat, right? And Alat, for example, is a crane god, right? It would bring the prayers, it would intercede for the believers. This is straight in the tafsirs of Ibn Kathir. It was a lower god, but it was still a deity that would intercede on your behalf. It was a crane, right? And this was it was a white stone. Yes, that's right. Ibn Kathir tells us that this white stone would intercede for the pagans. Now, Muhammad believed in a black stone. We are told in hadith that this black stone, from the words of the Prophet, though Muslims like to contradict his sayings and say that the black stone has no benefit, nor will it harm anybody. But the truth is, the Prophet had something completely different to say about the black stone. The Prophet said that at the end of times, it will have a tongue, and it will intercede for the believers, those that touched it and embraced it. This is why Muhammad touched and embraced it. So Muhammad believed in a stone that would intercede for him, even though the pagans that surrounded Muhammad believed in stones that would intercede for them. They believed in a God that would intercede for them that was a crane, and it was a white stone. Muhammad believes in a white stone that turned black that intercedes on his behalf. What is the difference between these two? Furthermore, Muhammad competed with various pagans, right, in their pilgrimage sites. And again, the ways that these pagans would act and revere these pagan symbols would be walking around it just like how Muhammad and the Muslims walk around the Kaaba. And by the way, they also referred to their pilgrimage site, the Dua Kalaza, which is also known as the Yemenite Kaaba or the White Kaaba. Muhammad, he said about this that the women of Daus, right, the people of the tribe of this area, he said the hour will not be established until the women of Daus move around the Yemenite Kaaba, the Dul Kalaza, while their buttocks waggle. He had this symbol destroyed during his lifetime and held a militant operation and had the tribe of Daus eliminated in one day. And this will happen to multiple tribes with Muhammad, where he had multiple tribes eliminated at high numbers in a short amount of time.
Chapter 6. And I saw when the Lamb opened one of the seals, and I heard, as it were the noise of thunder, one of the four beasts saying, Come and see. And I saw, and behold, a white horse, and he that sat on him had a bow, and a crown was given unto him, and he went forth conquering and to conquer. And when he had opened the second seal, I heard the second beast say, Come and see. And there went out another horse that was red, and power was given to him that sat thereon to take peace from the earth, and that they should kill one another. And there was given unto him a great sword.
It's kind of like how I was talking about. Muhammad had total tribes eliminated, right? In such high numbers, it was as if it was a massacre. Take, for instance, Ibn Ishaq's Search Rasulullah 464, page 464, tells us, Then I give judgment that the men be killed, the property divided, and the women and children taken as captives. Then they surrendered, and the apostle confined them in Medina. Then he sent for them, the people who surrendered, and struck off their heads in those trenches as they were brought out to him in batches. It goes on to say there were 600 or 700 in all, though some put the figure as high as 800 or 900. This is the Banu Qurayza, a tribe being totally massacred by Muhammad. So we have 800 men of one Jewish tribe, the Banu Qurayza, one tribe, and these men were totally massacred and killed in one singular day, in one afternoon happening. It gets worse. Compare to this to the sayings of Allah in Surah 33, verse 27, where it's directly about the Banu Qurayza, according to Ibn Kathir. We're literally told plainly, and He caused you, Allah caused you to inherit their land and their houses and their properties, and a land and not you had trodden. And Allah is on everything all powerful. So even in the Quran it tells you straight we're there that Allah gave Muhammad people that he didn't know, their land which he hadn't even trodden, and their properties. And what happened to the people living in these properties and in this land? We're literally told that their wives were taken by Muhammad, their children were taken by Muhammad, and the men died. The number puts it at as high as 800 and 900. It's right there in the earliest biography of the Prophet. If you skip over a few pages to 515, we are literally told in a similar case where Jews were slaughtered by the Prophet and the women were led past their dead husbands. Let's read. When the apostle had conquered Al-Qamas, the fort of Bi Abul Hukak, Safiya was brought to him along with another woman. These two women were brought to the Prophet. Bilal, who was bringing them, led them past the Jews who were slain. And when the woman who was with Safiya saw them, she shrieked. One of the two women saw them, she shrieked, and slapped her face and poured dust on her head. When the apostle saw her, he said, "Take this," and I quote, "she-devil away from me." He gave orders that Safiya was to be put behind him, one of the two women, and threw his mantle over her, so that the Muslims knew that he had chosen her for himself. It goes on to say, I have heard that the apostle said to Bilal, when he saw this Jewess behaving in that way, "Had you no compassion, Bilal, when you brought two women past their" what? And I quote, "dead husbands." Muhammad, right, called a woman a she-devil after she looked upon her dead husband as she was being taken captive as a sex slave. And Muhammad saying, well, if she's there, this one's for me. And in the other case, where we have the Banu Qurayza massacre, notice how it says that they take the women and children as captives and they killed the men. In a similar manner, this happened, right? And we see how the women did not like it. They're shrieking, they're upset about this stuff. And yet we have an all-knowing God telling Muhammad to do it in the Quran. I mean, beyond all that, he's a sand monkey, Muhammad. He's an absolute idiot, right? He told us in the hadiths of the great sayings of the Prophet, where the Prophet asked Abu Dhar at sunset, "Do you know where the sun goes at the time of sunset?" I replied, "Allah and His Apostle know better." He said, "It goes, i.e. travels, till it prostrates itself underneath the throne and takes the permission to rise again." The thing is, we're told that Allah is above the heavens and the earth. In fact, He's above all creation. We're told that He established Himself on the throne. He seated Himself upon the throne. And this throne is above creation. Now, this would mean that in Muhammad's mind, the sun would leave time, space, and matter. It would leave creation, journey above creation, no longer be in this realm, and wait for Allah's commandment to then come back to earth. That's Muhammad's explanation of what a sunset was. It gets even worse when the all-knowing God of Muhammad tells us that the sun sets in a muddy spring. Where this muddy spring is, I cannot tell you, and we cannot find such a spring that the sun, quote-unquote, sets in. It gets even worse when the Quran starts telling us about shooting stars and how they are just mere weapons of Allah, deflecting the demons that are trying to break into heaven. Like the Quran literally tells us that shooting stars are Allah's missiles. Some of the other teachings that were quite funny that Muhammad taught were some ways that people were allowed into heaven. We are told from the Prophet that a kafir and his killer will not be joined together in hellfire, merely proclaiming that if you're a murderer of a disbeliever, somebody who's in disbelief, if you murder a disbeliever, you have a pretty good chance in getting into heaven, as you will be far from that person in hellfire, and that person will be the one abiding in hell. Another way that Muhammad granted paradise was in the hadiths of Musnad Ahmed 16406. We are told it says that the Prophet was sucking on the tongue of his grandchild And he says, "May the prayers of Allah be upon him, for no tongue or lips that the Prophet sucked on will be tormented by hellfire," merely proclaiming that if you suck on this man's tongue, if you suck on the Prophet's tongue, you will not be tormented by hellfire. Not to mention, he's straight up making out with his grandchild. Now, that's not the only weird thing he did with his grandchild, in fact. It is also reported that Al-Hassan ibn Ali al-Fasawi reported from Khalid ibn Yazid al-Irani, who reported from Jarir ibn al-Hamid, who reported from Qabus ibn Abi Zabiyan, who reported from his father that Abdullah ibn Abbas said, "I saw the Prophet Muhammad spreading apart the thighs of Al-Hassan and kissing his penis." This is recorded in the book Al-Mujam al-Kubr by Al-Tabarani, and you can find it in volume 12, page 108, hadith 12615. Ibn Abbas, who saw the Prophet kissing his grandchild's penis, is the cousin of the Prophet. So in this room, we have the cousin of the Prophet observing the Prophet kissing the Prophet's grandchild's penis. And on top of those hadiths, we can go back to how all Muslims are going to have a Jew and a Christian be their advocate on the day of resurrection. It is said that Abu Musa said that the Messenger of Allah said, "When the day of resurrection comes, Allah be glorified and exalted as He will give every Muslim, a Jew or a Christian, and He will say, 'This is your ransom from hellfire.'" Every Muslim will have a Jew and a Christian placing out for their ransom. A few hadiths later, Sahih Muslim makes mention that the father of Abu Burda said that the Prophet said on the day of resurrection, some Muslim people will come with sins like mountains, but Allah will forgive them and will place them, the sins, on the Jews and the Christians. As far as I reckon, Abu Ra'ah said, "I do not know who is the one who was uncertain." And he said, "Did your father narrate that from the Messenger of Allah?" I said, "Yes." So the Messenger of Allah said, according to this authentic chain of narration, there will be a group of Muslims with heavy sins weighed out like mountains on their backs, and Allah will forgive them and place those sins on a Jew and a Christian, and they will be their ransom, and they will be able to abide in heaven, while the Jew and Christian takes upon their sin and will abide in hell with their sins and take their sins to hell along with them. The funny thing is that there's other hadiths like Sunan an-Nasai 4836 where it says no soul is affected by the sin of another, but yet the Prophet Muhammad, we just see him contradict that very statement. And if the Muslims want to say, "Oh, look at this hadith is contradicting that hadith, and one of them has to be true, one of them has to be false," is that how you're going to go with the Quran? Because this problem is found inside of the Quran as well. In Surah 17, Ayah 25, we have the often repeated statement that no burdened soul will bear the burden of another. On top of that statement, we have something interesting being said. In 17:15, it says, "Whoever is rightly guided is guided only for himself, and whoever goes astray only against himself." The reason why is because no one bearing a burden bears the burden of another. This means that if one carries a burden, there's no chance. According to this statement, there's no chance on the day of resurrection will they be able to bear the burden of another, since they are bearing their own burdens. On top of that, if you are misled, it doesn't matter. If you are led astray, you only go astray against yourself. We're told in 1625, however, that some people will bear their burdens fully on the day of resurrection. On top of those burdens that they bared fully will be other burdens that are not theirs, but of those whom they led astray. It not only contradicts the previous ayah in one way, where it says that no burdened soul will bear the burden of another. Are these people bearing burdens? It says clearly that they may bear their own burdens fully on the day of resurrection. If they are bearing burdens, according to the often repeated statement in the Quran that no burdened soul will bear the burden of another, this can't be so. But what happens on the day of resurrection? There'll be a group of people, according to 1625, that will have their sins be fully accounted for. They'll have burdens, and on top of those burdens will be other burdens that are not theirs, but of those whom they led astray. Even though 17:15 says this cannot be so.